Well, welcome back. In the last episode, we went through the car, did a lot of maintenance items, did spark plugs, fixed some oil leaks, did new coils, and got the car generally ready to run better. Also did O2 sensors, basically everything we need to do to get the car running great. Didn't do the air filter because there's a very good reason for that. And that's because we're completely deleting this. We're actually getting rid of the whole Airbox and we're gonna do a CSL box. The CSL box is by far the best part of E46 M3 ownership, at least in my opinion. And I have one right here. It's not an OE box, it's a Turner box, but it's gonna be pretty close. It's gonna give us the sound we want and also make the power gains we're looking for. Have a bunch of supporting mods up here. Have the Castle map kit, some assorted hardware, and also an SMG reservoir since this car is staying SMG for the time being. So I'm actually quite excited for this, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. First step is gonna be getting all this old stuff out of here. Car is already mostly disassembled, which is the perfect time to tear right back into it. But before we start, it's worth noting you can't simply just install these items on the car and expect it to run right. We're also gonna have to do the CSL tune, but we have a trick to do that a little bit later. So with that said, let's get to work. So if your car is an SMG, the first step is going to be to drain this reservoir. We won't be reusing it because it's actually a piece of the manifold itself. So I'm going to extract all the fluid that I can to try to prevent from making a mess. And once we have it out of there, we can start disconnecting the rest of the car. I just don't want to do this last, get excited, forget about it, and dump the CHF11 everywhere. Goodbye, Dining. Before I move forward, I'm going to clean this area up a little bit. Looks like I need to do a little bit of touch-up as well, thanks to the box rubbing. Not a big deal, though. We'll get it cleaned right up. Well, that looks drastically better. It's got a little paint missing right here, as well as a little bit down there. I think it's where the dining box that used to be in here was rubbing. For now, I'm gonna go ahead and touch this up with some touch-up paint that I bought, and then we'll get on to the next step. Not a perfect match, but better than surface rust would match, that's for sure. One other peculiar thing I noticed is that this has already been relocated down to the bottom and is rubbing. This is actually something you typically have to do with a CSL box, so that's interesting. Next up, just gonna remove these clips. I especially dislike these. There's tools that are better to use than a pair of needle nose, but basically you want to squeeze them and then they'll release. Removing them is much easier than getting them on, but just be forewarned. If you're going to do this, have some extras on hand because you're likely to mess one up. Just pulled the stock plenum out. It's pretty simple. It's just two tins on the bottom. You've got to disconnect some lines around it. Don't forget this one down here for I think it's a crankcase breather. You don't want to break that. While we're in here, I think we're going to go ahead and clean up the throttle bodies. They look a little rough. We'll also clean out this guy while we're here for a smooth idle. And we should be pretty close to put the new box on here soon. And about 45 minutes later, this is what we're left with. Took 2 cans of cleaner, but I think it was worth it. The next challenge is mounting the SMG reservoir. This one uses a remote reservoir since it's no longer built into the manifold. This is the bracket you're supposed to use. You're supposed to, I believe, drill into the fender and mount it, but I'm not gonna do that. What I ended up doing, there was a little grommet with a plastic clip on it that went through here and held this wire. So I pulled that out, ran just a 10mm bolt through it. Basically, you can't even see it on the inside of the fender, but this will give me the perfect spot to mount this with. It'll only be one hole, but this isn't a high stress item, so it'll be just fine. That's pretty solid. That's not gonna go anywhere. And then the reservoir itself just has some plastic feet. They slide in, lock into place, and that's what secures it. Okay, there's no kinks in the line. Everything's ran pretty good. So that's where it's gonna live. And then the box will actually come right through here. The dipstick will have to be bent back a little bit farther. Once we have the box in place, we can do that. I believe last time I zip tied it to this unit over here, but we'll see what happens once we get there. Every car can be a little different, so if you change things, it's not a big deal. This is the map sensor kit from Castle. It's gonna install right here, and then it'll give us a pigtail that'll go into our ECU box. This will give us map readings to work with the CSL software properly. So let's get this installed. Super easy to do. You just loosen these tins, pull this up, swap this out, and you're good to go. Map sensor is now in place. Comes with this nice lead. Ultimately trunicates into factory style DME pins. So that'll be nice once we get to that stage. The next step is gonna be putting the airbox on and getting everything snugged up and ready to start. Got the box in, it's looking pretty nice. This is the OE CSL filter. So to connect the other parts of the box, I just put a piece of heater hose in between this. It had broken earlier, if you remember. So no big deal, I was gonna extend it anyway. This is the stock shutoff valve. I just used a heat gun and lightly bent it. So it seems like it's gonna work just fine right there. One last look at the filter before I put the rest of the box on. Have to say it's looking quite nice. One more thing to mention, this is actually a matte carbon box. I put some ceramic coating on it and it turned into kind of a semi-gloss. It's not quite full-on gloss. I think it looks pretty nice. So this is the IAT sensor. I've got this harness that's gonna plug into here and transmit the IAT information to the ECU. That coupled with the MAF information should make this run pretty nicely. And again, it won't run on the stock software, so I'm not even gonna try to start it. We're gonna load the CSL software on it here shortly. Well, unfortunately, my mount bracket had different ideas. This one's got a different design. The snout's a little bit longer than the Carbonius one, which is modeled after the OE piece. So my reservoir will not fit right here. So I think I'm gonna put it down there. It's not ideal since it'll be running upstream a little bit, but I really have no other choice. I wasn't sure if I was gonna have to trim the shroud any for the intake. Turns out I did. I just made some quick cuts just to give it some room. Not a big deal. I actually just used an angle grinder and chopped it right off. SMG tank I ended up zip tying. Not overly proud of this solution, but it'll work for now. So I zip tied it to the headlight as well as a stud down here. Looks a little ugly, but at least it's solid. It's not gonna go anywhere. So yeah, that's where it'll live. I guess it's a reason to go ahead and change the car over to manual in the near future. But for now, we're gonna go with the SMG and see if we missed it at all. My guess is likely not, but hey, always more projects that we can do in the future. Also went ahead and reconnected the fan, all the fan shrouds. So the next step is just gonna be to zip tie this piece, just so it doesn't go wandering. The last thing we'd want is, I don't think it would physically be long enough to end up in the belts, but we're gonna secure it just in case. It's starting to look like a car again. I think we're ready to do a test start. The map sensor is not hooked up yet, but the IAT sensor is. I did verify with IMPA that it's getting a signal, and I went ahead and uploaded a full CSL firmware to the car. It's been modified for US cars, so the flap won't work. I believe a few other little changes. It's just to run a car in this style with just the intake itself and not the full CSL conversion. So far, so good. Went ahead and cleaned out that tray, ran my wiring, used some zip ties. We're getting pretty close. I still have to install the bar that goes across here, but we can't do that until we put the car on the ground. Gonna put a brand new cabin filter in and move on to the next step. So unfortunately, it turns out the bar won't fit. It makes contact right here on the box. I'm assuming that's because my engine mounts are brand new, but I don't know. It seems a little bit like a design flaw. It's close, but when the engine torques, it's gonna definitely hit. So I'm either gonna run some spacers here or do something else. But for the time being, I'm just gonna leave it off and move on to the actual wiring. And for the wiring, we're gonna go into the DME box over here. It's just several T20s. So once you loosen these, you'll pop it off and you'll be right into the wiring. So to do the map sensor wiring, we're looking for the 60003 connector. So this is going to be the 1, 2, 3. So we're looking for the large block. We'll have to remove these two to get to it. So we'll do that right now. The first one looks like it just clips out, and then the second one you'll have to actually undo this harness and it'll pop itself out. So the front one is going to pull out, which I already unclipped it. I had to put the camera down to do so. This one, just like that. And then this is the one we're going after. Also worth noting that the DMU plugs are all going to be black, whereas the SMG plugs, if your car has that, are all going to be this gray color. It's also worth noting I have some non-standard wiring in here. I traced it back and it looks like it's for an IAT sensor that's down by where the diamond box used to be. So you can tell that's spliced in right here. So I guess the connector on the box itself is inactive right now. I might leave it like this for the time being to see how it acts. But back to the connector, you're gonna need some picks and a very small screwdriver. That's just to get the connector body itself off. So we'll do that now. So I've got these out a little bit. I just pushed up on this tab very slightly and pushed from the back. They'll pop right out. The first one we're gonna put in is gonna be the signal wire, which is the yellow wire, and we're looking for pin 18, which should be empty. So this first one is labeled 1, so we're gonna pull it out first. So again, we're looking for 18. You can see this side is labeled 1 to 13, so we'll flip it over. And we've got 14 to 26. So to get to 18, we just count over 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. It's this one that has an empty slot. So we'll insert the pin now. Okay, so that one's in. The next one we're looking for is going to be pin 16, which also looks to be empty. We're going to put the ground wire in there. So we'll do that one now, which is this brown wire. You'll notice the other one has a spade on it. That's because we're going to have to tap into power for that one. So let's go ahead and insert this one. There it is, you can hear it click. And then the next one we need is going to be pin 7, so we flip this back over. So it's going to be this red and green wire. And what we're going to have to do is actually trace it out a little bit farther so that we can put the same color wire tapped into it with the spade. So this is the spade, this is the tap. So here's what we ended up with. So we're gonna reassemble this now, and then we'll put everything back in. The IAT wiring had already deformed this grommet a little bit in here, so I went ahead and passed this through in the same area. So it should be as good as it was before, and that's completely done. That was super easy, and it's really nice that the Castle kit uses the exact same color wires as factory. Next step is going to be to test that the map sensor is actually working. So I've got a program called Testo here. These are going to be the values. To get to here, you're going to go to the serial and then Vanos. So let's start it and see what happens. Yep, it's definitely working. You can see it change. So this is at atmospheric pressure, and then when it creates a vacuum, this is what happens. So it works perfectly. Forgot I can code a nice little novelty into the car. I can make the cluster with the CSL software actually show the oil level. So I'm going to do that real quick. Couldn't get NCS dummy to work for some reason, so I'm just going to change it manually here. So I'll make that active. We'll save this as a man file. Then we'll go back and code. And done. And there's our oil level. So with that done, now let's go for a drive. That's going to pretty much wrap up the video for my CSL box install. Car's running and driving great. I've got no check engine lights, no issues. The map sensor seems to do well with various environments. So overall, I'm extremely happy with it. The fitment could have been a little bit better on this one, but in the end, we got it working. For the acceleration videos, I actually had a microphone under the hood as well as one in the car, just to give a little blend. So it might sound a little exaggerated, but that's generally the sound that gets transmitted into the cabin, and it's glorious. So if you're on the fence about doing one of these, it's 100% worth the money. Highly recommended. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll be happy to answer them. As always, I thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.